Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some details have been altered to protect identities, but the events themselves are true and documented. This is meant to be listened to slowly and calmly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your breathing slow. And as you listen, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future stories. This story begins with a disappearance that no one noticed right away. A woman in her early 30s lived alone in a busy city. She worked from home, rarely socialized, and had no close family nearby. When she stopped responding to emails, her clients assumed she was taking time off. Days passed. Then weeks. When police finally entered her apartment, they found it clean and orderly. Her phone was gone. Her keys were missing. There were no signs of a struggle. Neighbors reported nothing unusual. The case quickly went cold, labeled as an adult who left voluntarily. Months later, another woman vanished under similar circumstances. Same age range. Same lifestyle. Same city. Again, no witnesses. No signs of violence. Investigators didn't connect the cases until a building manager mentioned something strange. Both women had recently requested maintenance work. The maintenance worker was cooperative when questioned. He had worked in dozens of buildings across the city. He had keys, access codes, and knowledge of residents' schedules. At first, nothing tied him directly to the disappearances. But detectives noticed that his work orders aligned perfectly with the days the women were last seen. A search of his storage unit revealed personal items belonging to multiple missing women. Jewelry, identification cards, phones, everything carefully organized and labeled. He had kept records of which buildings he worked in, which apartments belonged to people who lived alone, and which residents rarely had visitors. In another case, a quiet suburban street was shaken when a teenage boy went missing after a late-night walk. He was last seen heading toward a park he visited often. Weeks later, police discovered a hidden structure in a wooded area nearby. Inside were signs that someone had been living there for a long time. Maps of the neighborhood. Notes describing people's routines. The boy had been targeted simply because he was predictable. Another disturbing case comes from a long-term care facility where several residents died under mysterious circumstances. At first, it was assumed to be natural causes. But a nurse noticed inconsistencies in medication records. A deeper investigation revealed that a staff member had been administering incorrect dosages, carefully choosing patients who had no close relatives to question their deaths. He had worked there for years without suspicion. The final case in this story involves a man who posed as a delivery driver. He wore a uniform, carried packages, and knocked confidently on doors. Most people didn't think twice before opening them. Over time, reports of break-ins and assaults began to surface. Witnesses described a man who looked completely legitimate. It wasn't until security camera footage was analyzed that police realized the same man appeared in multiple locations, always wearing a different company logo. These stories are disturbing because they show how easily trust can be exploited. The people responsible didn't rely on force. They relied on access, on routine, on the assumption that familiar things are safe. True crime reminds us that danger often hides in plain sight, woven into everyday life. And while these stories are unsettling, awareness is one of the strongest forms of protection. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told quietly. Sleep well tonight, and stay safe. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names and identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are true and drawn from documented investigations. This is meant to be listened to slowly and calmly. If this type of content is not for you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the outside world fade for a while. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a small city where public transportation was the backbone of daily life. Thousands of people rode the same buses and trains every day, often recognizing faces without ever learning names. One of those familiar faces belonged to a man who had been driving a late-night bus route for years. He was known as quiet, reliable, and punctual. Riders trusted him without thinking twice. The first disappearance connected to this story involved a young woman who worked evenings. She was last seen boarding the bus just after midnight. Security cameras showed her stepping on, scanning her pass, and taking a seat near the back. She never exited at her stop. Her phone last pinged near the bus depot, then went silent. At the time, police believed she may have left voluntarily. Months later, another rider vanished. Then another. Each disappearance occurred late at night, always on the same route, always when the bus was nearly empty. Because public transportation footage is often overwritten quickly, crucial evidence was lost before anyone realized there was a pattern. The connection finally emerged when a transit supervisor noticed irregularities in the vehicle logs. The bus in question showed unexplained delays, short gaps where the GPS signal dropped, always in the same industrial area near the edge of the city. When confronted, the driver blamed technical issues. No one questioned him further. A breakthrough came when a passenger narrowly escaped. A man riding the bus noticed the driver pulling off route and slowing near an abandoned lot. Sensing something was wrong, he exited the bus early and reported the incident. Investigators reviewed what little footage remained and identified the driver as the common link. A search of a nearby warehouse revealed personal items belonging to multiple missing passengers. Bags, jackets, identification cards. Everything was stored carefully. Investigators realized the driver used his position to isolate victims, choosing times when no one would notice a missing rider. Another case tied to this investigation involved a woman who reported being followed after exiting the same bus line weeks earlier. She described a man in a transit uniform who walked behind her for several blocks before turning away. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. In hindsight, it became chilling. As the investigation deepened, detectives uncovered complaints that had been dismissed for years. Riders had reported feeling uncomfortable, noticing the bus doors remained closed longer than necessary, or that the driver watched them through the mirror. Each report alone seemed insignificant. Together, they painted a disturbing picture. Perhaps the most unsettling detail came from the driver's routine. He minimized passenger habits. Who rode alone? Who fell asleep? Who wore headphones and wouldn't hear the doors open? He relied on exhaustion and trust. In another city connected to this case, police uncovered a similar pattern involving a train attendant who had access to restricted areas and maintenance tunnels. Although the crimes were never proven to be linked, investigators noted the same theme: authority, familiarity, and access. What makes this story disturbing is how ordinary it all seemed. Public transportation is something millions rely on every day. It's routine, predictable, and that predictability was used against unsuspecting people. True crime often shows us that danger doesn't look like a threat. Sometimes it looks like a uniform, a schedule, a service we depend on. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told quietly and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay safe. Hello, and welcome. Before we begin, I want to warn you that the stories you're about to hear are based on real events, real people, and true crimes that shocked communities and left lasting scars. Everything you hear tonight is drawn from facts, court records, and news reports. If you are easily disturbed, please consider listening with caution. For those of you who are still here, I want to ask, where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. And if you like content like this, make sure to subscribe, so you never miss a story that chills you to the bone. We begin in a quiet suburban town. On the surface, it seemed peaceful, children playing in yards, neighbors exchanging polite greetings, the occasional dog barking. But behind one particular house, a darkness had been festering for years. The residents were unaware of the man living there, a man who had spent months carefully documenting the movements of people in his neighborhood, memorizing their routines, the times they left for work, when they returned. No one suspected that behind his friendly smile and waving hand, he was plotting. One evening, a young woman walking her dog noticed a strange vehicle parked along the street. It had no plates, and the driver seemed to be watching the houses intently. She dismissed it at first, telling herself she was being paranoid, but a feeling of unease gnawed at her. That feeling turned out to be justified. Over the following weeks, police would uncover items hidden in the man's home, items belonging to people who had vanished without a trace. Jewelry, personal belongings, even clothing. It became clear that the man had been abducting his victims, holding them in a secret room he had built behind a false wall. He was arrested after a neighbor reported suspicious sounds, and what authorities found inside was unimaginable, evidence of crimes that had remained unsolved for years. Moving across the country, another case unfolded in a rural area, where the forested roads are quiet and the nights are darker than anywhere else. A family had moved into an isolated farmhouse, unaware that the previous tenant had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Locals whispered about strange noises in the night, doors creaking open when no one was home, lights flickering in patterns that couldn't be explained. One night, a teenage girl woke to the sound of footsteps in the hall. At first, she thought it was her parents, but the footsteps stopped at her door. A shadow passed across her window. She froze, unable to breathe, as someone quietly knocked, then disappeared. Authorities later found that the previous tenant had been a serial intruder, targeting families who had recently moved into rural homes. He had recorded everything, every movement, every conversation, before he struck. His collection of photographs and video footage was extensive, and police were horrified at the calculated nature of his crimes. He didn't just commit crimes, he orchestrated fear. The most chilling detail was that he had visited homes without ever being seen, slipping in and out, leaving families unaware of how close the danger had been. Not far from there, a city case tells of a man who seemed harmless, even charitable. He volunteered at soup kitchens, attended local events, and smiled easily at strangers. But behind closed doors, he kept a journal detailing plans that were meticulous and disturbing. He had studied law enforcement protocols, noting when officers were least likely to patrol certain neighborhoods. Over several years, he committed a string of burglaries that escalated into violent crimes. His first victims were chosen at random, but over time, he targeted people he considered vulnerable, documenting each crime with cold precision. What ultimately led to his arrest was not a slip in planning but a single detail. One victim had managed to leave a hidden message in their home. When authorities discovered it, it revealed patterns that connected the dots across multiple cases. Then there's the story of a traveling salesman in the 1980s, a man who crisscrossed the country, charming everyone he met. He had a knack for blending into any environment, earning trust almost instantly. But in every town he visited, people began to disappear. Women, primarily, vanishing without a trace. His arrest came only after decades of investigations, after a retired detective noticed similarities between unsolved cases in different states. He had been meticulous, erasing almost every clue, relying on the transient nature of his work to stay unnoticed. What investigators discovered was chilling. Notebooks filled with coded records, locations marked on maps, dates of travel, all pointing to a methodical pattern of abduction and murder that spanned the nation. As we explore these stories, it's important to remember that the people involved were real, and the victims' lives mattered. Their fear, pain, and suffering were genuine. And yet, there's a strange fascination we feel when confronted with evil that hides behind ordinary faces. The man next door, the friendly volunteer, the charming traveler, anyone could be harboring secrets unimaginable. Another case takes us to a small coastal town. A fisherman was found dead in his boat one morning. At first, it seemed like a tragic accident, an unfortunate mishap at sea. But detectives noticed subtle signs. The ropes tied in an unusual way, a small piece of cloth that didn't belong to the victim, and a trail leading back to a warehouse along the docks. Inside, investigators found evidence of a criminal operation that had remained undetected for years. The perpetrator had been using the guise of fishing and shipping to cover illegal activities, including smuggling and kidnapping. The discovery shocked the town. People realized that danger had been lurking under the guise of normalcy for years, hidden behind the rhythm of everyday life. And then there is the unsettling story of a neighbor who noticed the smell first. It was faint at first, almost dismissible, but it lingered in the hallways, growing stronger day by day. The apartment next door was abandoned, or so it seemed. When authorities were finally called, they found a scene that defied understanding. The perpetrator had been keeping victims confined in the apartment, sustaining them just enough to prevent escape or death while inflicting psychological torment. Letters, recordings, and photographs documented months of abuse. The most chilling aspect was the meticulous care the criminal had taken to avoid detection. Soundproofing, careful disposal of evidence, and calculated timing of movements, so neighbors never suspected a thing. Sometimes, true crime is terrifying not because of the acts themselves, but because of the planning, the patience, and the cold rationality behind them. Each of these cases reveals a disturbing pattern. The most dangerous people often appear ordinary. They live among us, smiling, nodding, participating in communities, while hiding a reality too dark to imagine. In another haunting story, a young couple rented a cabin in the mountains for a weekend getaway. They arrived to serene surroundings, expecting nothing but quiet and solitude. But the first night, they noticed a car parked far down the dirt road, headlights off, engine running. Assuming it was another visitor, they tried to ignore it. The second night, the car returned. This time, there was a figure standing near the edge of the woods, watching. Panicked, they left early the next morning. Got it? Completely new story, shorter by 500 words, written directly in chat. No code box, no titles, smooth TTS flow, intro plus engagement included. Here you go. Hello, and welcome. Before we begin, I want you to know that the stories you're about to hear are based on real crimes involving real people. Names and certain identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are true, drawn from police investigations, court records, and documented cases. These are not fictional stories. If disturbing content affects you, now would be a good time to stop listening. For those staying with me, get comfortable. Let your eyes rest. And while you're listening, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. I always like to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and it lets me keep bringing you stories like this. The first story takes place in a small town where nothing ever seemed to happen. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and waved to strangers without thinking twice. A man lived there for nearly 10 years without ever drawing attention to himself. He worked a normal job, paid his bills on time, and never caused trouble. What no one knew was that he spent his nights walking the streets, memorizing routines. Which lights went off at what time? Which houses were empty? Which people lived alone? When he was finally arrested, police found detailed notes inside his home. Floor plans drawn from memory. Lists of addresses. Times written beside names. Some of those names belonged to people who had been missing for years. The town would later learn that several cold cases, long assumed to be unrelated, were all connected to the same quiet man they passed on the sidewalk every day. Another case begins in a large city apartment complex where neighbors rarely spoke. A woman reported hearing noises through the walls late at night. At first, she assumed it was music or a television. But over time, the sounds became more unsettling. Crying. Muffled voices. Something heavy being dragged across the floor. Each time she called security, nothing was found. It wasn't until months later, after a strange smell began to spread through the hallway, that police forced their way into the apartment. Inside, they discovered a carefully hidden room. The walls had been reinforced to block sound. Inside that room was evidence of prolonged captivity. The person responsible had lived among hundreds of residents, riding the elevator with them, making small talk, all while committing crimes just a few feet away. In another disturbing case, a man who traveled for work became the focus of a multi-state investigation. 4 years, disappearances had occurred near highways, rest stops, and small motels. No pattern was found until one investigator noticed that the dates aligned with a single individual's travel schedule. When authorities searched his vehicle, they found tools, restraints, and notebooks filled with coded entries. Each entry corresponded to a victim, reduced to numbers and symbols. Perhaps the most unsettling story comes from a rural area where homes are miles apart. A family began noticing small things out of place. Footprints near their windows. Objects moved slightly from where they had been left. At night, they heard someone walking around their house. They assumed it was animals. One night, a motion light revealed a man standing in their yard, watching the house in silence. He fled before police arrived. Months later, he was arrested for breaking into homes and watching families sleep, sometimes for hours at a time, without ever being noticed. These cases are disturbing not just because of the crimes themselves, but because of how ordinary the perpetrators appeared. They blended in. They lived normal lives. They were trusted, ignored, or overlooked. True crime reminds us that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. And sometimes it lives right next door. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories told quietly, slowly, and based on real events. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that what you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some details have been changed to protect identities, but these events truly happened. These stories are not meant to shock, but to quietly reveal the darker sides of real life. If this kind of content isn't for you, it's okay to step away now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your breathing slow. And as always, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how many places these stories reach. If you find yourself coming back for more true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe. It helps more than you know. This story begins with a missing person report that didn't seem urgent at first. A middle-aged man failed to show up for work. He lived alone, didn't have close family, and was known to take spontaneous trips. His employer waited 3 days before calling police. When officers entered his home, nothing appeared wrong. His wallet was gone. His car was missing. There were no signs of a struggle. The case was quietly filed as a voluntary disappearance. Weeks later, another person vanished. Then another. All lived alone. All had routine lives. All disappeared without signs of violence. The cases were handled separately, spread across neighboring towns, and no one connected them at first. The connection emerged by accident. A patrol officer noticed that each missing person had recently visited the same self-storage facility. At first, it seemed like coincidence. But when detectives pulled security footage, they noticed the same employee helping each of them. He was polite, helpful, and forgettable. He helped them choose unit sizes, explained payment plans, and walked them down narrow hallways lined with metal doors. When questioned, the employee cooperated fully. He answered calmly. He even joked with investigators. He said he saw hundreds of customers every month and barely remembered any of them. But investigators noticed something odd. His access logs showed he entered the facility late at night, often long after closing hours. A warrant was obtained to search the facility. Most units were filled with ordinary items, furniture, boxes, old clothes. But one unit stood out. It was paid for in cash. Always on time. No name on the account. Inside, police found plastic sheeting, restraints, and personal belongings linked to multiple missing people. The employee was arrested that same night. During interrogation, he revealed a routine that had gone unnoticed for years. He targeted people with no close family, no one likely to raise immediate alarm. He used his job to gain trust. Once inside the storage facility after hours, there were no witnesses. No cameras in certain corridors. No sounds that could escape the reinforced walls. What disturbed investigators most was not just the crimes, but how long it went undetected. Customers walked past the unit every day, unaware of what had happened inside. The building sat beside a busy road, surrounded by normal life. Another case takes us to a quiet retirement community. An elderly woman reported receiving phone calls late at night. No one spoke on the other end. Just breathing. Police advised her to block the number. Weeks later, she was found deceased in her home. At first, it appeared to be natural causes. But an autopsy revealed otherwise. Investigators traced the calls to a man who worked as a home maintenance contractor in the area. He had keys to dozens of homes. He knew schedules. He knew who lived alone. Over time, police uncovered a pattern of surveillance and psychological torment before his crimes. He didn't rush. He observed. He waited. Perhaps the most unsettling case comes from a college campus where students felt safe walking at night. A series of assaults occurred in dormitories with no signs of forced entry. Doors were locked. Windows intact. Panic spread as students realized someone had access. The perpetrator turned out to be a former campus employee who had kept a master key after being dismissed. 4 months, he moved freely through buildings after midnight. He blended into the environment so well that several victims recalled seeing him earlier that day and feeling no fear. In each of these cases, the common thread is access, trust, familiarity. The crimes didn't happen in dark alleys or abandoned places. They happened where people felt secure, where they assumed nothing bad could happen. True crime teaches us that danger often hides behind normal routines, ordinary jobs, familiar faces. And while these stories are disturbing, they are also reminders to stay aware, to trust discomfort, and to question what feels slightly off. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more real true crime stories told calmly, quietly, and without distraction. Sleep well tonight, and stay safe. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that what you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are true and drawn from documented cases. These stories are meant to be listened to slowly, quietly, and with care. If this kind of content isn't for you, it's okay to stop here. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the noise of the day fade away. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins with a house that no one wanted. It sat on the edge of a small town, empty for years, even as the housing market grew tighter. Each time someone moved in, they moved out within months. Neighbors said the house felt wrong. Doors would be found unlocked. Lights turned on by themselves. People heard footsteps on the stairs late at night, even when no one else was home. Eventually, a young couple purchased the house, dismissing the rumors as superstition. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Then small things began to happen. Items disappeared and reappeared in different rooms. The couple heard soft noises in the walls, like breathing or shuffling. They assumed it was animals. One night, the woman woke up and realized someone was standing at the foot of the bed. She couldn't see a face, only a shape. When she screamed, the figure fled. Police searched the house and found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No explanation. Days later, the man noticed something odd in the basement. A section of wall sounded hollow when tapped. Behind it, police discovered a narrow crawl space that led to a hidden room. Inside were blankets, food wrappers, bottles of water, and notebooks filled with observations. The writer had been living inside the house, unnoticed, for months. He documented the couple's schedules, conversations, and sleeping habits in disturbing detail. The intruder was arrested weeks later. He had been entering homes through crawl spaces and attic vents, living inside them without the occupants' knowledge. Investigators linked him to multiple cases across the state. Families had unknowingly shared their homes with a stranger, sometimes for years. Another case comes from a hospital where patients began reporting strange encounters late at night. People claimed a staff member checked on them, adjusted their fours, and spoke softly. The problem was that no such staff member was scheduled. Security footage later revealed a man wearing scrubs, moving confidently through restricted areas. He wasn't an employee. He had stolen a uniform and memorized routines. When arrested, authorities found he had targeted vulnerable patients, exploiting their weakened state. He blended in perfectly. No one questioned him because he looked like he belonged. In a different city, a string of disappearances puzzled investigators. All the victims had used the same rideshare service shortly before vanishing. Data eventually revealed a driver who had deactivated his GPS during certain trips. His car was found to contain personal belongings from multiple missing people. He had taken advantage of trust and convenience, turning something familiar into something dangerous. The final case in this story involves a man who volunteered at a community center. He taught classes, helped with events, and was known by name. Over time, he gained access to private spaces, storage rooms, and offices. When a fire broke out in the building, investigators discovered evidence of crimes hidden in areas only volunteers could reach. The man had used his position to commit acts that went unnoticed for years. What makes these cases disturbing isn't just what happened, but how close it all was. Inside homes. Inside hospitals. Inside places meant to be safe. The perpetrators didn't force their way in. They were already there. True crime shows us that danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks helpful. Sometimes it looks ordinary. And sometimes it lives quietly in the background of daily life. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware.
Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves come from documented investigations, court records, and witness accounts. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let your breathing slow. Let the noise of the day fade into the background. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place people rarely think twice about, a public library. It was a large, modern building with quiet reading rooms, computer stations, and long rows of shelves. Students, retirees, and families passed through every day. People came to feel safe, anonymous, and undisturbed. For years, nothing seemed out of place. Then a woman who visited the library several times a week stopped coming. Staff assumed she had changed her routine. A few months later, another regular patron vanished. Then another. None of them were connected. Different ages. Different backgrounds. Different lives. The connection wasn't discovered until a librarian mentioned something odd during a routine meeting. She said she often saw the same man assisting people in the back areas of the building. He didn't work there, but he always appeared to be helping, guiding patrons to shelves, assisting with printers, offering directions. He blended in so well that no one questioned him. Security footage revealed the man entering the building almost daily. He stayed for hours. He never checked out books. He spent most of his time observing, watching who arrived alone, who stayed late, who used secluded study rooms or corners far from staff desks. When police reviewed footage from the days the missing patrons were last seen, they noticed the same pattern. The man would follow at a distance. He never rushed. He waited for moments when people stood up, gathered their things, and walked toward exits or restrooms. He always kept enough distance to appear coincidental. Investigators later learned that several patrons had reported uncomfortable interactions over the years. Someone standing too close. Someone asking personal questions. Someone offering help that felt unnecessary. Each complaint had been dismissed as harmless or misunderstood. A break in the case came when a college student trusted her instincts. She noticed the same man appearing near her every time she visited the library. Different clothes. Same posture. Same calm stare. One evening, she left abruptly and reported the behavior. Her description matched the person seen in footage tied to multiple disappearances. Police identified him as a former security contractor who had worked in public buildings years earlier. He knew layouts, blind spots, exit routes. He knew how to move through spaces without drawing attention. He had no official access anymore, but he didn't need it. A search of a storage unit connected to him revealed personal items belonging to multiple missing individuals. Library cards, notebooks, bags, items taken not for value, but as confirmation. He had documented dates, times, and locations in careful handwriting. As the investigation expanded, detectives discovered that some victims had been followed beyond the library. He learned routines. Which bus they took, which direction they walked. He preferred places where people felt invisible but secure, where no one questioned quiet behavior. Another disturbing detail emerged from interviews with witnesses. Several people recalled seeing the man reading quietly in the same spot for hours, never turning a page. He wasn't there to read. He was there to watch. Perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is how many chances there were to stop it earlier. Small discomforts ignored. Patterns overlooked. Familiarity mistaken for safety. The library remained open and welcoming, even as something dark passed silently through it. These crimes didn't happen in abandoned places or dangerous neighborhoods. They happened in a public space meant for peace and learning. A place where silence was expected, and attention was low. True crime reminds us that danger doesn't always interrupt. Sometimes it blends in. Sometimes it sits quietly nearby, waiting for routine to do the work for it. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness testimony. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place designed to feel safe through routine, a commuter train line that ran through several quiet suburbs and into the city. Every morning and evening, the same faces appeared on the platforms. People stood in the same spots, sat in the same seats. Over time, strangers became familiar silhouettes. That familiarity created comfort and invisibility. The first incident was so subtle it barely registered. A woman reported that someone had brushed against her on the train and whispered something she couldn't quite hear. She assumed it was an accident. Trains were crowded. People were tired. She forgot about it. Weeks later, another commuter reported something similar. Then another. Each described a man who stood too close, who followed them through the station without speaking, who always seemed to disappear before anyone could point him out. Because nothing overt happened, reports were minimal and unconnected. Then one commuter didn't come home. She was a young professional who took the same train every evening. Her partner reported her missing when she didn't answer calls or arrive home. Security footage showed her exiting the train and walking toward the parking structure. She was never seen again. Police initially suspected an isolated incident. But when another commuter vanished months later under similar circumstances, investigators began reviewing transit footage more closely. They noticed the same man appearing repeatedly on different days, always standing near the edge of platforms, always boarding the same cars, always exiting at different stops. He had learned how to move with the flow. He positioned himself where people expected others to stand. He timed his movements to avoid cameras or blend into crowds. He never rushed. He waited. Transit police interviewed dozens of commuters and discovered something unsettling. Many people remembered him once they were shown images. They described him as forgettable. Average height. Neutral expression. Someone you wouldn't look at twice. Several recalled moments of discomfort but dismissed them because nothing technically happened. Further investigation revealed that the man had been riding the trains for years without a clear destination. He tracked routines. Who walked alone? Who parked far from entrances? Who used stairwells instead of elevators? He noted which stations were poorly lit at night and which security cameras were often broken. A breakthrough came when a commuter reported a near encounter. She noticed the man following her through the station and into the parking structure. When she stopped suddenly and turned around, he stopped too. When she pretended to make a phone call and changed direction, he mirrored her movements. She approached a security booth and stayed there until he left. Her report provided a detailed description that matched the suspect. Police searched his residence and found transit maps covered in handwritten notes. Times circled. Stations marked. Exit routes highlighted. He had documented patterns with disturbing precision. They also found personal items belonging to multiple missing commuters, items taken not for financial gain, but as proof. As the case unfolded, detectives realized how the environment itself had helped him. Trains are liminal spaces. People are distracted. Headphones in. Eyes down. Everyone assumes someone else is paying attention. The suspect relied on that shared detachment. In interviews, he described his approach as patient. He said he preferred places where people were mentally elsewhere, where routines ran on autopilot. He never forced situations. He waited for predictability to open doors. The aftermath changed the commute forever for many residents. Platforms were redesigned. Lighting improved. Security increased. But the biggest shift was psychological. People began looking up, making eye contact, trusting discomfort instead of dismissing it. This story is unsettling not because it involves unfamiliar danger, but because it took place in the most ordinary moments of daily life. Standing on a platform, waiting for a train, walking to a car. Moments repeated thousands of times without incident, until one day, they weren't. True crime reminds us that awareness doesn't mean living in fear. It means staying present. It means recognizing patterns. It means understanding that safety can erode quietly when routine becomes automatic. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness accounts. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the noise of the day fade. Let your breathing slow. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place people rarely think of as dangerous, a quiet medical office building that closed promptly at 5 o'clock every evening. During the day, it was busy and well lit, filled with patients, staff, and the low hum of routine care. At night, it became something else entirely, silent hallways, locked offices, and long stretches of emptiness broken only by the occasional cleaning crew. For years, nothing unusual was reported. Then a receptionist at a dental practice noticed something strange. Files on her desk had been moved after hours. Not taken. Just rearranged. She assumed the cleaning staff had bumped them. She mentioned it casually, and everyone laughed it off. A few weeks later, a therapist working late heard footsteps outside her office long after the building had closed. She opened the door and saw no one. The security desk told her it was probably an HVAC technician or a cleaner running behind. She believed them. Then a medical billing clerk failed to show up for work. She was reliable, quiet, and lived alone. When she didn't answer calls, police were asked to perform a welfare check. Her apartment was locked from the inside. Nothing appeared disturbed. Her phone was on the nightstand. Her car was parked in its usual spot. There were no signs of forced entry. At first, investigators suspected a personal issue. Maybe she had left town. Maybe she needed time away. But friends insisted that didn't fit. She had been excited about an upcoming trip. She had plans. Months passed. Then another employee from the same building disappeared. This time, it was a night janitor who worked alone after hours. His co-workers assumed he had quit without notice. It wasn't until his family reported him missing that police realized the connection. Detectives began examining the building more closely. They reviewed security footage, which revealed long stretches of time with no recorded activity. Cameras covered entrances and main corridors, but many interior hallways and offices were not monitored. Anyone familiar with the layout could move through the building unseen. Attention turned to a man who worked as a contracted security guard. He wasn't assigned to the building full-time, but he filled in regularly during overnight shifts. Staff described him as polite, quiet, and professional. He wore the uniform. He followed procedures. He blended in. Access logs showed that his key card had been used at unusual hours, often long after his shifts officially ended. When questioned, he explained that he stayed late to finish reports or conduct extra patrols. At first, his answers seemed reasonable. But investigators noticed something unsettling in the footage they did have. On several nights connected to the disappearances, he could be seen entering the building hours before his shift and leaving well after. Sometimes he carried nothing. Sometimes he carried a small bag. He always moved calmly, never rushing. Police searched his vehicle and found notebooks filled with dates, times, and names. Some were crossed out. Others were circled. Many belonged to people who worked in or frequently visited the building. He had noted routines: who stayed late, who worked alone, who took which stairwell. A search of a storage unit rented in his name revealed personal belongings from multiple victims. Identification badges. Prescription bottles. Watches. Items taken not for money, but for possession. For proof. As the investigation expanded, detectives uncovered earlier complaints that had never been connected. A nurse practitioner recalled finding her office door unlocked when she was certain she had locked it. A patient remembered seeing a security guard inside a restricted hallway where he shouldn't have been. A cleaner once reported someone standing silently at the end of a corridor, watching her work, then walking away without speaking. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery came when police examined the building's ceiling access points. Above several offices, panels had been removed and replaced. Inside the crawl spaces, investigators found evidence that someone had been moving through them: dust disturbed, insulation compressed, small personal items dropped accidentally and left behind. He had been watching from above. The suspect admitted during questioning that he preferred places like the medical building. He said people trusted uniforms. They assumed authority. They didn't want to question someone who appeared to belong. He relied on that hesitation. He also admitted that he spent months observing before acting. He learned schedules. Learned which doors were rarely used. Learned which lights were left on late. He described the building as quiet, predictable, and forgiving of small irregularities. In one narrowly avoided case, a staff member arrived early for an appointment and noticed someone exiting her office. When she asked what he was doing, he calmly told her he was responding to an alarm. There had been no alarm. She believed him anyway. It wasn't until much later that she realized how close she had come. As news spread, former employees began sharing experiences they had dismissed at the time. Sounds in empty hallways. The feeling of being watched. The sense that someone had been inside their office without permission. All of it made sense now. The case revealed how environments built on routine and trust can become dangerous when oversight is limited. Medical buildings, like many professional spaces, are designed to feel controlled and safe. But that sense of security can hide blind spots, literal and psychological. In the aftermath, policies changed. Access was restricted. Cameras were added. Contractors were monitored more closely. But for many, the damage was already done. People struggled to return to work without replaying memories of quiet hallways and flickering lights. This story is unsettling because it didn't unfold in darkness or isolation. It happened in a place associated with care, professionalism, and order. It happened quietly, patiently, and over time. True crime often reminds us that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it follows the rules just enough to avoid attention. Sometimes it waits in silence, counting on routine to do the rest. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness accounts. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your body relax. Let the background noise fade. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place people associate with rest and routine, a long-term care facility on the edge of a small town. It wasn't a hospital, but it wasn't quite a home either. Residents lived there for months or years, supported by rotating staff, visiting family members, and a strict daily schedule that rarely changed. The facility had a good reputation. Families trusted it. Inspections were always passed. Staff turnover was low. Nothing about the building or its employees raised concern, until subtle inconsistencies began to appear. It started with medication discrepancies. Small ones. A pill missing here. A dosage logged at a time when the patient was asleep. Nurses assumed it was a paperwork issue. Charts were corrected and life moved on. Then a resident died unexpectedly. He was elderly, but stable. His condition hadn't changed in months. His death was attributed to natural causes. The family was saddened but not suspicious. Within weeks, another resident passed away under similar circumstances. Then another. Each death on its own made sense. But a nurse who had worked night shifts for years began to feel uneasy. She noticed that the deaths often occurred during the same overnight hours. Always quiet. Always calm. No alarms. No emergencies. She reported her concerns to management. They reviewed records and found nothing conclusive. The facility continued operating as usual. Months later, a resident was found unresponsive but survived after being rushed to a hospital. Blood tests revealed medication levels far higher than prescribed. The explanation was unclear. The doctor assumed a mistake had been made. The resident couldn't communicate clearly enough to explain what had happened. That incident changed everything. Authorities began a quiet investigation. They reviewed staff schedules, medication logs, and security footage. One name appeared repeatedly. A senior caregiver who worked mostly overnight shifts. He was known as dependable, calm, someone who volunteered for extra hours. Families praised him for being attentive. Security footage showed him entering rooms without logging visits. Sometimes he stayed longer than necessary. Sometimes he stood beside beds without performing any obvious tasks. Always quiet. Always unhurried. Investigators discovered that he had access to medication storage and understood dosage systems better than most. He knew which residents had no visitors, which families lived far away, which patients wouldn't be able to describe what they felt. When police searched his locker and vehicle, they found handwritten notes, room numbers, names, times, observations about sleep patterns and medical conditions. Some names were crossed out. Others circled. Former staff members were interviewed again. This time, they shared things they had dismissed before. The caregiver spending too long in darkened rooms. The way he insisted on handling certain residents alone. How he discouraged family visits late at night, claiming residents needed rest. One nurse remembered catching him sitting silently beside a patient who was already asleep. When asked what he was doing, he said he was keeping them company. She didn't question it at the time. As investigators connected the timeline, it became clear that his actions had gone unnoticed because they blended into caregiving routines. In a place where people expect vulnerability, dependence, and quiet, small deviations didn't stand out. During questioning, he admitted that he preferred environments where people were already fragile, where death wasn't unexpected, where authority figures were trusted without question. He described the facility as predictable, controlled, safe from scrutiny. The revelation devastated families and staff alike. People replayed memories, wondering how many signs they had missed. How often kindness had been mistaken for care. How trust had been exploited. The facility implemented immediate changes. Medication controls were tightened. Overnight staffing increased. Cameras were installed in hallways. But the sense of violation lingered long after. This story is disturbing not because it involved chaos or violence, but because it unfolded quietly, behind closed doors, in a place built on trust and compassion. It reminds us that danger doesn't always look threatening. Sometimes it looks responsible. Sometimes it looks helpful. True crime teaches us that awareness matters, even in places we assume are safe by design. That trust should never replace oversight. And that listening to quiet discomfort can make a difference. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware.